Taipei number 6. High school had a secret. At night, when the halls were empty and the lights flickered, something moved in the shadows. Students whispered about it, but no one dared to stay late to find out the truth. They called it the Phantom Janitor. It all started years ago. The school had an old janitor named Mr. Wu. He had worked there for decades, cleaning the halls and fixing broken lights. But one day, he disappeared. No one knew what happened to him. His tools were found in the basement, his mop still wet, but Mr. Wu was gone. The school hired a new janitor and moved on. Then, strange things began to happen. Students who stayed late for club activities heard footsteps in empty hallways. Lights would turn on and off by themselves. The smell of cleaning chemicals filled the air when no janitor was around. The most terrifying thing? Some students claimed they saw a shadowy figure mopping the floors, even when the school was locked. One night, 3 students, Lily, Jason, and Eric, decided to solve the mystery. They were part of the photography club and had to stay late to organize pictures for an upcoming event. When their work was done, they grabbed their cameras and flashlights and went to the basement. The basement was cold and damp. Old desks and broken chairs were piled in the corners. As they walked deeper inside, a strong smell of bleach burned their noses. Suddenly, Jason gasped. "Look," he whispered, pointing to the far end of the room. A mop bucket stood there, filled with water. But the water wasn't still, it rippled, as if someone had just dipped a mop into it. Eric swallowed hard. "Maybe someone was just here. Then where are they now?" Lily asked, her voice shaking. A slow, creaking sound made them freeze. The door they had entered through was slowly closing by itself. Then, footsteps echoed in the basement. Not just any footsteps, wet, squelching ones, like someone walking with soaked shoes. Lily raised her camera and clicked the shutter. The flash lit up the room for a second, and that's when they saw him. A tall, thin man in a janitor's uniform stood at the far end of the basement. His face was pale, his eyes dark hollows. He held a mop, water dripping from it onto the floor, and he was staring right at them. Jason screamed. Eric grabbed Lily's arm and they ran. They reached the door, but it wouldn't budge. Behind them, the sound of dragging footsteps got closer. Then, a whisper floated through the air. "The floors must stay clean." Lily fumbled with her camera, her hands shaking. She turned and took another picture. The flash burst again. This time, the janitor was only a few feet away, his wet mop leaving dark stains on the floor. His lips curled into a twisted smile. Then, the lights flickered, and everything went dark. The next morning, a teacher found the 3 students in the basement, huddled together, shaking with fear. They had passed out. When they woke up, they were too scared to talk about what happened. But Lily's camera still had the pictures. She checked them later that day. In the first picture, the janitor stood in the far corner. In the second, he was closer. But in the third, the last picture showed only the mop bucket tipped over, with water spreading across the floor. Mr. Wu was never found, but to this day, students still hear the sound of a mop sliding across the floors at night. And if you stay too late, you might just see him, keeping the school spotless forever. Montverde Academy was a beautiful school in Florida. The old brick building stood tall, surrounded by large oak trees. But there was one place students never dared to go after dark: the old music hall. Legend had it that long ago, a woman in a red dress played the piano there. She was the school's music teacher. Some said she was kind, others said she was strict, but one thing was certain: she loved music more than anything. One night, during a terrible storm, lightning struck the music hall. The building caught fire and the teacher was trapped inside. When the flames were finally put out, all that was left was a burnt piano and a red dress lying in the ashes. Ever since then, students whispered about the lady in red. They said if you played the piano after midnight, she would appear. Jake and his friends loved ghost stories, but they didn't believe in them. One night, they decided to test the legend. "I dare you to play the piano in the old music hall," Jake challenged his friend Lucas. Lucas laughed. Easy. The 3 boys, Jake, Lucas, and Eric, sneaked into the music hall at midnight. The air inside was cold, even though it was summer. Dust covered the floor, and the old piano sat in the corner, looking untouched for years. Lucas sat at the piano and played a simple tune. The notes echoed in the empty hall. Nothing happened. "See? Just a dumb story," Lucas said. But then, a soft clink came from the piano. The boys froze. "Did you hear that?" Eric whispered. Before they could move, the piano played a note by itself. Then another, and another. The keys pressed down, as if invisible fingers were playing them. The air grew thick, and the smell of smoke filled the room. Suddenly, a woman's voice whispered, "You should not be here." Jake turned his head slowly, his heart pounding. In the dim light, a figure stood near the piano. She wore a long red dress. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and hollow. Smoke curled around her feet. "The lady in red," Lucas screamed. The ghost lifted her hand, and the piano keys slammed down with a loud crash. The boys ran toward the door, but it slammed shut on its own. "You woke me up," the ghost said, her voice cold and sharp. "Now, you must stay." Jake pulled at the door handle. It wouldn't budge. The lady in red moved closer. The room filled with the sound of piano music, fast, wild, and angry. Lucas turned and shouted, "We're sorry. We didn't mean to disturb you." For a moment, the ghost paused. Her dark eyes stared at them. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished. The music stopped, and the door creaked open. The boys didn't wait. They ran as fast as they could, not stopping until they reached their dorm. The next morning, they told their classmates what had happened, but no one believed them. That night, as Jake lay in bed, he heard something soft and distant, the sound of a piano playing. He pulled the covers over his head, his heart racing. The lady in red was still there, waiting, and she never liked being disturbed. Ravi and his friends loved scary stories. They often met at night on the rooftop of their apartment in Chennai to share ghost tales. One evening, Ramesh, the oldest of the group, spoke in a low voice. "Have you heard about the crying girl of Chennai?" he asked. The others shook their heads. Ramesh continued, "Many years ago, in a small house near Marina Beach, a little girl named Mira lived with her parents. One night, her parents left her alone to attend a wedding. When they returned, they found the house silent. Mira was missing. They searched everywhere but never found her. Some say she was taken by an evil spirit." Ravi shivered. "What happened next?" "People say that at midnight, near Marina Beach, you can hear a girl crying. Those who try to find her either go missing or return home, terrified, never speaking about what they saw." Rahul, the bravest of the group, smirked. "Ghost stories are nonsense. Let's go to Marina Beach tonight and prove it's just a myth." Ravi and the others hesitated, but they didn't want to seem scared. So, at 11:30 p.m., they sneaked out of their homes and rode their bicycles to the beach. The beach was silent except for the waves crashing against the shore. A cold wind blew, making Ravi pull his jacket tighter. They walked toward an old broken house near the beach. The moonlight made its shattered windows look like dark, empty eyes. Suddenly, they heard a soft sobbing sound. A chill ran down their spines. The sound was coming from behind the house. "Maybe it's just the wind," Rahul whispered, but his voice trembled. They followed the sound carefully. As they turned the corner, they saw a girl sitting on the ground, her face hidden in her hands. She was wearing an old torn dress, and her long hair covered most of her face. Ravi's heart pounded. Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The girl stopped crying and slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were hollow, dark, and empty. Her skin was pale, almost glowing in the moonlight. A sudden gust of wind howled through the trees. The girl let out a terrible scream, her mouth stretching wider than any humans should. Her scream echoed through the night, sending a sharp pain through their ears. "Run!" Ramesh yelled. They turned and ran as fast as they could, their hearts racing with fear. The sound of footsteps followed them, but none of them dared to look back. When they reached their bicycles, Ravi turned for a brief second. The girl was gone. Only the sound of the waves remained. They rode home in silence, their faces pale. That night, none of them slept. The next morning, Ravi's mother noticed his pale face. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Ravi didn't answer. He had no words to explain what he had seen. From that day on, none of them spoke about that night. But every time they passed Marina Beach, they walked a little faster, afraid that the crying girl of Chennai was still watching them, waiting for the next visitor to hear her cries. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Also, hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.